Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own To Take Care of You or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lisbeth_1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Celine.
To Take Care of You, Chapter 2. 3 days after being rescued from the Camarilla, Telly woke up screaming. The loud scream that shattered the stillness of the late night had Sarah panicking before she was even fully awake. Telly was flailing, one of her arms narrowly missing, smacking Sarah in the chest as she sat up, heart thundering in her chest, and Telly was still screaming. "Telly!" Sarah caught Telly's arm as it swung by her head, reaching out to grab her other arm at the same time. "Telly, love, wake up!" Her initial panic at the sound of Telly's screaming had tempered slightly, but there was still an edge of concern that forced its way into Sarah's chest, evident in the distress in her voice. Telly's screams quieted at Sarah's touch, gentle despite holding her straining arms in place, and the silence was suddenly deafening. The only sound to be heard was the blood rushing through Sarah's ears. Telly's arms still fought against Sarah's grip, and Sarah spoke again, trying to keep her voice even. "Wake up," she said, just a touch louder, and Telly's eyes finally flew open with a gasp. Her arms froze in mid-air, and her eyes were unfocused as they darted around the dark room, trying to make sense of her surroundings. Breath coming and going in loud, short gasps. Her eyes finally landed on Sarah, hovering worriedly over her, hands still holding onto her wrists gently. "Sarah!" Her voice broke at the same time as she did, the other woman's name coming out as a loud sob that only served to sharpen the edge of worry buried in Sarah's chest. She sat up, flinging herself into Sarah's arms, and Sarah instantly pulled her close, arms going to wrap tightly around Telly. "It's okay, you're okay," she soothed as Telly began to shake in her arms. Telly's skin was hot against Sarah's, her thin sleep shirt damp with sweat, and Sarah could feel the shoulder of her own shirt become wet as Telly began to sob into it. "You're okay," Sarah said again, feeling Telly's hands curl tightly into the back of her shirt. Sarah's own hand began to run gently up and down the length of Telly's back. "You're safe now. I've got you." She felt Telly nod desperately into her shoulder, another sob wrecking her body. "Just breathe for me, love." Sarah turned to whisper her words into Telly's hair, pressing a kiss to her temple and resting her head there. "Remember to breathe." A few minutes passed before Telly's sobbing faded away into quiet gasps, but she still clung tightly to Sarah, head turning to rest her forehead into the crook of Sarah's neck. "Do you want to talk about it?" Sarah asked quietly. She had a feeling she knew what the nightmare was about. It had only been a few days since Telly had been taken, but she still wanted to give Telly the opportunity to talk about it, if she wanted. Telly was quiet for a long moment, Sarah still running her hand gently up and down Telly's back, before she finally spoke. "I dreamt she began, her voice unsteady and thick with more unshed tears. I dreamt that I was back there, in the warehouse. Sarah's arms tightened around Tally. Only this time, Tally's voice cracked. This time you weren't there and they... A sob erupted from her chest, interrupting whatever she had been going to say. Hey, listen to me, Sarah said quickly, softly, drawing Tally back from her neck and gently tilting her head up so that she could look Sarah in the eyes. You're not back there. You're here with me, she stressed, watching Tally nod quickly. You're safe now. She lifted her hand to brush away some of Tally's tears. I'm not going to let them take you from me again, she said softly, letting the hand she had brushed away Tally's tears with cradle her cheek. Okay. Tally's eyes slid shut, and she sniffed loudly, nodding slightly as she leaned more fully into Sarah's hand. Okay. Come here, Sarah said, and Tally immediately leaned forward again, as Sarah drew her completely into her lap. They sat in silence for a while, until Tally's breathing finally calmed down into something resembling a normal breathing pattern, Sarah tracing comforting patterns over her back the entire time. Are you okay? Sarah asked, after a long stretch of silence. Be honest, please. It's okay if you aren't. She felt Tally take in a long, shuddering breath. I don't know, she admitted. Okay, Sarah said, nodding. What do you need? Tally drew back from where her head had been resting on Sarah's shoulder to look at her, confused. What do you mean? Sarah traced her thumb over the path of Tally's cheekbone. To be okay, what do you need? Tell me and I'll make it happen. Tally blinked back tears, and she looked down at her sweat-soaked shirt. I think I want to take a shower. Okay, Sarah said softly. She hadn't stopped the movements on Tally's back. Or I could draw you a bath instead. Whatever you want. Tally sniffed again. A bath sounds nice, actually. Her voice was raw from crying. I'll get one started, Sarah said, making sure to keep her voice soft. You can get some of my clothing to wear afterwards. Tally nodded and she slid from Sarah's arms, making her way over to the dresser that held Sarah's civilian clothing in it. Sarah slipped from her bed, walking over to the bathroom and flipping the light switch, wincing slightly as the darkness suddenly gave way to the bright, fluorescent of the lights. She dimmed them into a soft orange color and perched herself on the edge of the tub, turning on the water. There was a soft noise behind her, and Sarah turned slightly to find Tally setting some clothing on the bathroom counter. Her eyes and the tip of her nose were red, and she was avoiding looking at Sarah as she went to start getting undressed. Sarah's hand shot out to grab Tally's wrist, standing as she did so. Come here, she said once again, and Tally looked over at her, confused, but she crossed the small space between them towards Sarah. Sarah leaned down to kiss Tally softly, just a brush of their lips against one another. I love you. I love you too, Sarah, Tally whispered back, breath ghosting over Sarah's lips, before Sarah pulled back. She let go of Tally's arm, only to hook her fingers under the hem of Tally's shirt, and Tally watched with surprised eyes as Sarah slid the shirt over her head. Tally let Sarah finish, slowly undressing her, and then allowed herself to be led over and lowered gently into the now filled tub. The water was warm and comforting, and Tally slid backwards, resting her head on the edge of the tub with a heavy sigh. Better? Sarah murmured. Her hand had gone into the tub as she sat back down on the edge of it, finding Tally's under the water and taking it into her own. Getting there, Tally said as her eyes slid closed. Good. Tally felt Sarah kiss her forehead before she let go of her hand, and Telly immediately opened her eyes back up to protest, but stopped when she saw what Sarah was doing. Sarah had begun to take her own clothes off, stepping easily out of her sweats and pulling her tank top over her head. Telly automatically moved forward from the back of the tub as Sarah stepped into it from behind her and sat down, long legs going on either side of Telly's body. Telly sighed again, more contently this time, and leaned back against Sarah, feeling her arms come forward to loop around Telly's stomach. "This is better," Telly said, and she felt Sarah smile against her bare skin as she pressed a kiss to Telly's shoulder. Good. There was another kiss, this one to her witch's mark just behind her ear, and Telly once again felt tears spring to her eyes, but for a very different reason. "I didn't know it could be like this," she said. Sarah's hand was tracing lazy patterns on Telly's stomach and ribs. "What could, darling?" she asked, voice just as gentle as her touch. Telly stretched slightly, pressing back against Sarah more, and her toes peeked into the cold air above the water, briefly, before she submerged them in the warmth again. "Being loved." Sarah's hand paused in its movements, only briefly. "What does it feel like to you?" "It feels like..." Telly closed her eyes. "It feels like warmth, comfort, like safety and security." She swallowed. "Sarah, your love feels like home." Sarah's fingers dug into her ribs slightly at her words, and she heard Sarah draw in a sharp breath behind her. Sarah sat up slightly so she could pull Telly flat against her chest, resting her chin on Telly's shoulder. "Oh, Telly." Sarah's forehead pressed against Telly's cheek, and Telly shifted slightly in Sarah's arms so she could look at her fully. "What does it feel like to you?" Sarah brought their foreheads together, one hand cupping Telly's cheek and the other curled around Telly's waist. "It feels like, even after over 300 years of life, that I didn't know what it meant to be alive, until now." She pulled back slightly, her blue eyes shining in the light from unshed tears. "Telly, your love makes me feel alive."
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.